and spread your word through our Lutheran schools as we do your work, as we integrate the faith into all things, and as we reveal you in all the disciplines and subjects that we teach. Help us today be with Scott as we talk about exciting times in various states and locations with tax credit programs and voucher programs, and what those are and how they may help and serve our schools to help and serve those families who send their children to our schools or look to do so. Guide us in all things, and as always, help us to go and make disciples of all nations. In your son's name we pray. Amen.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Freeman. So he kind of gave you a brief bio of my experience here as at least an adult serving in Lutheran schools, but really my connection with Lutheran schools goes back to when I was born. My parents are both Lutheran educators. Dad was a Lutheran school principal and mom was a teacher. Uncles and aunts and cousins. This is just kind of the family business, I guess. And so all that is to say, I love our Lutheran schools. And I really want our Lutheran schools to not just survive, but I really want our schools to thrive. We need our schools more than ever right now. It's kind of a wackadoodle world out there. And we need our schools to be faithful and strong and to bring the gospel message to our children. And so when I do think of our Lutheran schools, there are really four things that matter most to me. And again, the first thing is that we're sharing the gospel. That's why our schools exist. That's first and foremost, of course. Providing a great academic program is also very, very important for us, of course, as we all know. Third one here is being respectfully operated. And this was something that Perry Brazeman used to always say. If any of you are my age or older, you probably all know Perry. But he always talked about being respectfully operated, making sure we're dotting our I's, crossing our T's, making sure that we have our policies and procedures in place and so forth, and just being professional about what we're doing. But now the fourth thing that is really important to me is that our Lutheran schools have the funding necessary to accomplish the mission and vision that is set in front of them. And so securing the adequate funding is really important. And as we do that, there really are three S's that I want to introduce to you. And this is kind of stolen from the old Advanced Ed accreditation protocol. But the first S is systemic. When you think about your funding model, it really has to be a part of your entire organization. It has to be an institutional type of a thing to really have that systemic part to keep this thing strong. And also, it should be systematic. There should be a well thought out plan in how we fund our Lutheran schools. And of course, whatever we do, it has to be sustainable. And certainly these Finance Friday meetings are all about equipping our schools to encourage greater sustainability. You know, how we fund our schools, of course, has changed from way back in the day. You know, churches funded the schools, offerings. When I went to Lutheran school growing up, there was no tuition really. But those days are long gone because the cost to educate a child has far outpaced the financial support provided through a church. So we have a gap. And so how do we fund that gap? Well, we charge tuition, right? But even with tuition, there still can be a gap because if you're in rural America, you probably aren't able to charge $10,000, $12,000, $15,000 in tuition. That just isn't realistic. So we still have this gap. So what do? Well, kind of pandemic era things, the government provided EANS money and PPP money. But the government continues to provide federal child money, federal hot lunch money, and so forth. That can all help fund the gap. Also, designated gifts, those special projects that we have, that's probably something that is incorporated into your model to fund that gap. Bequests and planned giving. Right now is a great time to be talking to some of those older folks connected with your schools to set up those endowments or those foundations. I've seen estimates all over the board, but when our baby boomers right now, when they pass, there could be as much as $60 trillion that are exchanged over the next 25 years. So who's going to get that money? I'm not anti-government, but we don't want the government to get any of that money, right? We want, of course, family and our church and our schools. And so schools should be having planned giving conversations for sure with their people. But then also, of course, the whole purpose of this particular Finance Friday meeting is to talk about these other great opportunities out there to help fund that gap: education savings accounts, school vouchers, and tax credit scholarships. And all of that is really lumped into the overall topic of school choice. And I have a little disclaimer here. that the data and the numbers that I'm presenting here today have largely been drawn from EdChoice and the Institute for Quality Education, IQE. EdChoice and IQE are really leaders in our country advocating for our non-public schools to bring choice to make it possible in our various states in our country. And they do really, really great job doing all that. And so a lot of this information came from that resource. All right, so school choice is growing in our country. I know maybe there were a couple areas where it took a step back here recently, but in general, it has grown tremendously over the years. Currently, there's over 1 million students who are participating in school choice programs. 75 school choice programs are operating in 33 states, including Washington, D.C. and Puerto Rico. And it's very possible that more expansions are on the way. You know, it's interesting. I would say that the school choice initiatives are more of a right side of the political aisle sort of a thing, not so much on the left. But that's not a completely consistent statement either. You know, certainly you look on the West Coast, Washington, Oregon, and California, those states tend to be more politically on the left. Not surprising that there isn't school choice out there. But Texas is pretty conservative, right? And yet there still isn't school choice in Texas right now either. So it definitely is more of a right-leaning initiative, but it's not always 100% true, of course. So school choice initiatives are broad. Again, school choice is an overall term. We're going to spend time on ESA, school vouchers, and tax credit scholarships, but there also are things called like the tax credit education savings account, refundable tax credits, and individual tax credits and deductions as well. But we're primarily going to focus on those top three here on this particular page. So let's start then with education savings accounts, ESAs. An education savings account is a government authorized savings account that families can use for school tuition, educational products and services, and much more. Of course, funding comes from income taxes, sales tax, or both to fund education in states. And of course, those funds become available to pay for the education. ESAs are funded with a portion of that money the state has allocated for each child's education. Generally, parents access ESAs through online platforms with the child's allocated amount already loaded into that. Families can use their ESA to purchase educational goods and services, prove categories to customize their children's education, of course, including things like tuition and tutoring, other online education. Then in some cases, they can also roll over unused funds for future expenses, including college. So ESAs are funded with our tax dollars, and parents have a lot of freedom and, quite frankly, the control to determine how those dollars should best be used to impact their child's education. As far as ESAs in our country, 19 ESA programs in 17 states currently, and over 470,000 students are currently using an ESA or a tax credit ESA, with an average award of over $7,500. You start looking at the impact of an ESA to your overall school's budget, it can be very, very significant if they're using that ESA to help fund the tuition. Again, great growth in ESAs, 50,000 kids in 2020, again, over 470,000 today. So fantastic growth. Every state that has an ESA does look at things a little bit differently. And so just to give you an idea, here in the state of Indiana, where I live, our ESA is called an education savings account. And it's to qualify, you have to meet an income guideline. You can't earn more than 400% of the free and reduced lunch rate, which is a very big number. For a family of four, it's $230,000. So pretty much every Hoosier is going to be able to qualify financially. But also there are some other, I would say, strings attached with this. The schools receiving ESAs have to administer the state testing program, which is a big deal for some schools for sure. And also the amount that a child can receive is capped at 90% of whatever we receive in the public school. And here's the big thing in Indiana, this is specifically for special education. Kids have to have an IEP in order to receive an education savings account scholarship. And also there's a $10 million limit that set in the entire state. And so once that 10 million is allocated, then no one else can apply for that. So the ESA is great in Indiana in some regards, but also is very limiting. Arizona, it looks like, is the most expansive program in the country. It's called the Empowerment Scholarship Account there. All K through 12 children plus pre-K students with disabilities are eligible, and there's no testing mandate. Awards are still capped at that 90% of the per pupil based funding, but there generally are not as many regulations with the ESA program in Arizona. So it's a pretty strong program as well in our country. So that's ESA. Again, keynote there is that it's funded with tax dollars, and parents have a lot of choice in all that. School vouchers are also a great opportunity here when we think about the choice program. School voucher is a portion of money that the state has allocated for a parent to pay partial or full tuition for religious and non-religious options. Parents gather information about schooling options and then pick a school that uniquely fits their child's needs. Then the family visits the school. If it's a good fit, the family and the school work together to get the voucher in play to help pay for that tuition. The parent typically has to sign various documents and provide various forms and income verifications and so much more in order to receive that voucher. But it's a real thing that is very helpful to our schools. And again, those vouchers are funded with tax dollars. Again, parents just direct that money to go directly to the school. So in our country right now, there are 25 voucher programs in 16 states, including Washington, D.C. and Puerto Rico. 10 states have universal school choice programs or are very close to universal. And again, over 323,000 students are currently in this voucher program. With an average award of over $8,500, that's a very significant dollar amount that can help fund, again, that gap that we've talked about here. Again, just like ESA, school vouchers have experienced phenomenal growth over the years. 50,000 students in 2007, up to 323,000 now here in 2024. Oops. And so again, two more examples. Here in Indiana, it's called the Choice Scholarship Program. Again, income eligibility is 400% of that free and reduced lunch rate. Again, schools have to administer our state's testing program. And again, the child amount award is capped at 90% of what they would have received in the public schools. And again, there are some other regulations here in Indiana. They have to participate in all the data reporting and some other state reporting things that our public schools have to do as well. And so there are some regulations to participate in the school choice program here in Indiana. Wisconsin is interesting that the statewide program is the parental choice program, but there's also programs in Milwaukee and Racine. To qualify, though, it's 220% the free reduced lunch rate. But the voucher cap is actually up to $10,000 for elementary schools and $12,000 for high school students. And so in Wisconsin, the dollar amount is much more, but you have to make less money to actually qualify than here in Indiana. So again, every state has different rules on how that school voucher is implemented. And so certainly if you have a state that has that, you need to take a close look at that to make sure that you are able to meet all those qualifications. The last one here is the Tax Credit Scholarship Program. And this one is very near and dear to my heart because this is my job right now. I work with the Indiana Tax Credit Scholarship Program. And so tax credit scholarships, it's a private school scholarship given to students by a nonprofit here in Indiana. It's the Lutheran Scholarship Granting Organization that is funded through private taxpayer donations. And to inspire taxpayers to donate more, the government offers tax credits for their donations. Then when donors file their income taxes, they are reimbursed to some degree for that donation from the state. Again, every state is different. Similarly to ESAs and vouchers, parents work with the school to find a good fit for their child. And then once they do, a child gets a scholarship of some varying amount to go to that school. Again, the amount that they receive depends upon the amount of money that has been raised for that particular school's scholarship account. And also, again, a factor would be the amount of the tax credit that is allowed for a particular school. The lower the limit, the smaller the potential scholarship, of course, and the higher the limit, the higher the potential scholarship. So tax credit scholarships, unlike ESAs and vouchers, are funded through private donations. And this is great because I think it's an opportunity to actively involve those people who love our schools. And I can tell you here in Indiana that the byproduct that comes from those who donate is great. Again, it's just one more way that they show support for really a great school that they know and love. And again, the donors receive the tax credit on their donation. And I promise you, this is the easiest fundraising you would ever do, to be able to tell a potential donor that, hey, if you give to this to this program to support your favorite Lutheran school, you'll receive some of that money back in the form of a credit. It's a great way to encourage people to participate in supporting this particular program. All right, so let's see how many of these programs are in our country. Well, again, as of last year, there were 26 tax credit programs in 20 states. It sounds like through various referendums this year, maybe 3 of those programs have gone away, unfortunately, but still is pretty strong here across our country. 225,000 students are using tax credit scholarships, and over 18,000 are using those refundable tax credits, which we kind of alluded to before also. And the average award is over $3,600. And so the dollar amount is considerably less than ESAs and vouchers, which makes sense again, because this is all the result of privately funded sources. And the tax credit programs in our country have experienced a lot of growth over the years, but recently have declined. And you can see the numbers there. Part of, I think that decline is because as the voucher programs have become more robust, there maybe hasn't been quite of a perceived need anyway to continue on with tax credit scholarship programs in the same way. Now, again, an idea of what 2 different tax credit programs look like. Again, here in Indiana, it's the scholarship tax credit program. You have to still qualify to receive that scholarship, 400% of the free reduced lunch rate, but you're not required to administer the state testing program. So we have some schools here in Indiana who don't participate in the voucher program, but definitely still participate in the tax credits program because there's less regulations. Here in Indiana, a donor can receive a 50% tax credit up to that person's tax liability. So if that person's state tax liability is $3,000, that person can give $6,000 to the Lutheran Scholarship Granting Organization, designate that money for their favorite school, and then receive a 50% tax credit of $3,000, which would essentially wipe out what they would have owed the state. And there is a cap on the credits at $18.5 million. Now in Ohio, it's called the Opportunity Scholarship Act. The Opportunity Scholarship Act. And in Ohio, you can give $750 at 100% reimbursement rate or credit rate. So the dollar amount is significantly less than in Indiana and other states, but it's 100% value on that credit. So again, every state does it differently. So if you're a state that has this, just make sure that you know the rules. Now, again, this is kind of an Indiana thing, but I think it points out some of the potential benefit of these tax credit scholarship programs. In Indiana, the government might hypothetically say, you have to give $100. You don't have a choice. You have to do it, but you have to give it in one of 2 buckets, either the state bucket or your Lutheran school bucket. Well, I would hope that all of us would pick the Lutheran school bucket to put that $100 in. And you know what? Just for playing along, we're going to say you can contribute an extra $100, but it's still only going to cost $100 because we're giving that $100 back to you. And so basically you have the option of giving the state $100 and your Lutheran school nothing, or give the state nothing and your Lutheran school $200. It's a very, I guess the incentive there is fantastic to support our Lutheran schools in this particular way. Then also here's another just quick example. Martin K. Luther, they gave $1,000 to Trinity Lutheran School in 2023. And if they could itemize on the federal side, just hypothetically, if they could, most of us can't, but if they could, maybe they received a deduction of roughly 25%, lowering their actual out-of-pocket expense to $750. But in 2024, they gave $2,000 to the Lutheran Scholarship Granting Organization, designate that money for Trinity still. They received a tax credit of $1,000, and the other $1,000 they were still able to itemize. So bringing down their net cost still to $750. So essentially they have doubled their gift without any more money coming out of that person's bank account. And so with these tax credit scholarship programs out there, if you have someone who says, hey, I want to make a contribution to the school, and I want to help support scholarships, you should always direct them towards your tax credit scholarship program, and then encourage them to even increase their gift, understanding that it's not going to cost them anything more to make that particular gift. And so tax credit scholarships are great out there. Now, in order for all this to happen, whether you're talking about an ESA or a voucher or a tax credit scholarship, you have to set your tuition appropriately, because you can't receive more of a voucher than what your tuition is, right? Your posted tuition has to be greater than or equal to your voucher, your ESA, your tax credit scholarships, and whatever their parents are paying out of their pocket. And so we don't want to leave any money on the table. And so we have to set our tuition appropriately. Now, here's a very bad scenario. First of all, you need to figure out how much it costs to educate a child, right? And there's spreadsheets that are available for you that the national office can give you or I can give you to help you determine what that is. But go through that exercise. Let's say it's $10,000. Well, if I'm only charging $5,000, then that's the maximum voucher that I can get. And I still have $5,000 in additional funding that I need. And if the voucher is $7,000, well, I'm leaving $2,000 on the table. And also, you can't access any other ESA or tax credit scholarships. So you're really limiting yourself there. And again, that $5,000 that you need additional funding, where's that going to come from? Well, probably your congregation or maybe some other fundraisers that you do. And so a much better scenario is this. You set your tuition to match your per pupil cost. And then again, in this scenario, you can access then that full $7,000 in school in vouchers. And maybe you can get $1,000 for the tax credit scholarship program if your state has that. And maybe your parents pay $500. So in this scenario, you're lowering the additional funding necessary from $5,000 down to $1,500, which is great for a congregation, right? So you really have those three levers to pull in this scenario: your tax credit scholarships and what the parents pay and what the additional funding is. If the tax credit scholarship amount that you can award increases because you have great donations, well, that can lower than what the parents are paying or the additional funding needed. If you're short on what you're hoping to raise for the scholarships, well, then it's going to be made up either with the parents or the additional funding from your congregation. But again, all this starts with knowing how much it actually costs to educate a child, and then posting your tuition, setting your tuition to match that. So you have the most headroom there to allow yourself the best opportunity to raise money to fund your school. All right, so as we come into this, some schools love all these school choice options, and some schools, quite frankly, have some hesitation to participate. And every school has to decide who they are, and more importantly, where they want to go and who they want to be in the future to determine if these are good things or not to do. And so there are some considerations that I want to just throw out here to you as you consider participating in ESAs, vouchers, or tax credit scholarship programs. The first thing here is don't chase the money. I remember when school choice vouchers were new here in Indiana, John Milkey was our district executive. And that was the main point he kept hammering home with everybody is don't chase the money. It's really about these students and trying to get them in their school to teach them about Jesus. But they still have to be a really good fit, right? Don't just accept a student because you want the money. It probably isn't going to go well for you. All right. And also consider whatever regulations there are to participate in those programs. Again, knowing the rules is incredibly important, and understanding the pros and the cons. Again, you have to really, I think, take the time to consider what the impact of participating in these school choice initiatives is. And there are definitely some great things and some things that, again, just might make you pause for a second. And then whatever you do, then just make the decision intentionally to participate or not to participate. Don't just shoot from the hip, so to speak, right? Be very intentional about all that. So here are some positives that at least I've found here with my experience here in Indiana working with Lutheran schools. The first one's obvious, right? With school choice vouchers here in Indiana and the tax credit program and ESAs, paying tuition really shouldn't be a barrier that would prevent anyone from coming to one of our Lutheran schools. There's just so many great opportunities here in Indiana and in many other states to lower that out-of-pocket cost for a parent. So that's a huge pro, obviously. And then this also is probably the biggest positive that we have found here in Indiana when it comes to all these school choice initiatives is that we have students in our school who might not have been in our school without those financial programs. And many of our students that are in our schools now have come in without any religious background at all, not knowing Jesus as their Savior. And so our Lutheran schools have had really a great opportunity to be really evangelical in bringing the message of Jesus to some of those kids and their families who maybe haven't ever heard of any of that before. just last year, there was a Lutheran school. I was attending their National Lutheran Schools Week service, and they had 6 kids and one of the parents who were all baptized at their Lutheran Schools Week service. Like, that's a praise God moment for sure. The last year I was principal, 5 years ago, we had over 20 baptisms in the springtime. And again, and all those kids were recipients of school choice vouchers. So I think that the Spirit is moving through these programs to bring people into our schools who maybe don't have that relationship with Jesus. So that's a huge positive reason or positive outcome of these initiatives. Student diversity also increases. And I don't mean just ethnically, but I think also in the amount of students that we can service in our schools. Like many schools, like the box of kids is like this. Well, how can we expand the box, to meet other special needs? Kids who have IEPs, kids who have other special learning needs haven't always been able to have those needs met in our Lutheran schools. But with some of these school choice initiatives, there's more money available to hire additional staff, so you can increase the number of students and the type of needs they have in your schools. That's definitely a very positive outcome from some of this. And again, the additional funding allows programming in both the school and the church to expand, because as the church spends less to fund the school, that allows the church to grow and expand in other areas as well. The last year I was principal, comparing the things that we had in place as far as programming and staff compared to when I first started there 20 years ago, significantly more. We were able to hire an assistant principal, a full-time nurse, resource teachers. Currently, that school has a special ed director. And all those things weren't in place 20 years ago, but because of the additional funding, we were able to have those positions in place. Also, our church was able to finally have 3 pastors, large place, and able to do that and expand children's ministry with more staff in our youth ministry and adult ministry programming. And all that, I think, is tied in to the additional funding that was made available to the entire church because of these school choice initiatives. So here is a real life example of a Lutheran school in Indiana. Back in 2012, 2013, back when the voucher program here in Indiana was brand new, you can see this particular school, 79% of the funding for the school came from the church, 19% from parents. Then other supporting churches and the vouchers were 1% each. So that's a pretty big commitment that the church had financially to keep the school open. Now look at where the school is as of last year. Look at that. School choice vouchers almost provide 50% of the funding. And then our Lutheran SGO, it's our tax credit program, another 19%. So really almost 70% of the funding now is shifted from outside sources. And so the church's responsibility to fund the school went from, again, 79% down to 23%. And the parent percent of paying tuition went from 19% down to 7%. And so just the whole funding model has shifted, but it has provided many more dollars again to expand programming, to expand the kingdom really, and to reach a broader base of students. So I think that these slides are pretty striking right there. Now also, here's just another way of looking at this information. This school has almost doubled its budget in the last 12 years, but that's the top line there. But look at the funding from the church. Has decreased significantly. The voucher amount that we receive has increased, and of course that tax credit program has also increased. Parent tuition out-of-pocket expenses has decreased, and so these charts, I think, really tell the story of the financial impact that school choice has had in some of our schools here, at least in Indiana. All right. But there are some things to be aware of course, if you embark in one of these programs. And the first thing is that schools become dependent upon receiving school choice dollars. That sample that I just showed you before, almost 70% of the money is coming from school choice. That's a huge chunk. The question is always, well, what will you do if that program goes away? Well, I mean, right now in Indiana, there aren't really any signs of it going away. But as Dr. Freeman pointed out, a couple of our schools, the school choice initiative was was basically rescinded in the last election. So it is something to be aware of, to know your state and what the climate is or what the appetite is for school choice. Because certainly here in Indiana, our schools have become dependent upon it. Again, we're not worried about going away here in Indiana, but not every state is that way. So it's something to be cautious of for sure. Also, participate in the state testing programs. Some schools will not want to do that, or follow other state regulations. Again, depending upon where your school is at with all that, will determine if it's something that you're willing to do or not. But definitely know those rules. And then also, just again, personal experience, there's a lot of time that it can take to complete all the paperwork necessary to be a school choice school. And it's something that, again, where I was at, we hired additional staff to help with that. Again, it's something that we don't need our principals to have anything more to do. Our principals are already pretty overloaded and, quite honestly, approaching burnout in many cases. And so we don't want to add more to their plate. There has to be a plan for someone else in the building to manage all those programs. And here's a reality. Sometimes students are accepted who shouldn't have been accepted for various reasons, whether academic or behavioral. Again, don't chase the money. Make sure you have a sound admissions policy in place. Make sure you follow it. Make sure that you accept students who are going to be a good fit for what you can provide for them in your particular school. And then also, maintaining Lutheran identity can be challenging. Some of the schools in Indiana who don't participate in the school choice program, this is probably the number one concern. Again, they don't want to lose their identity as Lutherans, all right? They want to make sure that they keep that strong in play, of course. And so, I'm not going to criticize those schools for doing that. It all comes back to vision, and this is who they are and who they want to be. And so some of these school choice initiatives aren't really going to fit into where they're headed. And the last one here is that there is, of course, opposition from public schools and those who support public schools. That's a real thing, and depending upon what your current relationship is, I suspect probably in rural America that relationship is more tight. It's probably more favorable than in our big cities. But once you start embarking in these programs, you just have to walk that dance, or that line of not wanting to offend our friends in the public school, but also wanting to take advantage of these opportunities that are certainly in front of us as well. So there are wins obviously associated with school choice, and this is the last slide here in the presentation. And it's a win for the school, of course, because it increases the revenue. It's a win for the family because it could lower their out-of-pocket cost. It's a win for the church because it could reduce the required financial support necessary from the church. It's a potential win for the donor if they participate in the state tax credit program. But most importantly, it's a win for our students because they hear about Jesus every single day. If you're trying to talk to people about school choice and if it's a good thing for your school or not, bring it all back to your kids. Again, why are schools here? We're here to teach them about Jesus every single day. Why would I want to participate in a tax credit scholarship program? Well, yeah, the tax credit is great, but it's really about providing funding so that kids can hear about Jesus every single day in our Lutheran schools. And so that's really where we have to keep the focus as we go forward here with these school choice initiatives. All right. Well, it's about 35 minutes into this, and I know there's opportunities for folks to ask questions. And so I would certainly open it up to anybody or any of their comments right now.
Yeah, so Scott, that was excellent. Thank you for doing that. Will's going to monitor the chats, I think, on all of our platforms. So Zoom chat, I know we have viewers on Facebook as well and elsewhere. So feel free to type in if you have a question. Just a couple of things. One of the things that I find quite interesting, and I've kind of been trained on here recently by some people supporting the choice programs, and we really are calling them now parent choice programs to make it very apparent that the parent is the one responsible for educating the child. We know that in Lutheran schools, right? Because it's biblically based. You as a parent are the one responsible for educating your child. Sometimes school choice is seen as method to make people believe the other way, that it's government run and, schools are clamoring for this money and some other things. So also, that's, I still use school choice too and everything, but it's very important, I think, these days. We see it more and more. Also, I love your comment. Will and I were sitting here talking about don't chase the money. That's so true, right? You need to know your mission statement. Your mission statement should guide everything that you do. You should have a strategic plan. We're also talking about the fact of that you really need to know the cost to educate a child. Your graphic up there was great because we talk about that all the time. You need to put that out there, even if you're in a state without choice programs or vouchers or anything. People need to be aware what the actual cost to educate a child is. And it's always fascinating too, because it's out there. The public schools have to publish, the Department of Ed has to publish the cost to educate a student in the public school and what they spend. And most states, we are way under what that number is. They're spending on average typically $16,000 or so, if not more. And the increase in the number of staff, especially those that are not educators in the classroom, and what that has looked like over the last number of years. So it's pretty impressive what our Lutheran schools do. Faith integration, absolutely, but educational excellence as well, as we promote that also. Will, any questions on there?
No.
No questions?
Questions yet?
Okay, well, we'll hang on and look at a couple things. I do have a couple, Scott, because I got to make sure that we ask some things here as we give people some time. What do you do to promote participation in the scholarship granting organization in Indiana? Because I hear this a lot. For instance, Missouri has most scholars. I was just talking to someone this morning about the Most Scholars program and how do we get that information out there and how do we encourage people to donate to that because it's a tax credit program. What's your thoughts on that, and what are some best practices that you've seen there?
Well, a lot of these tax credit programs really sound too good to be true. If you talk to someone and say, now listen, you're going to get half your money back on your donation up to your tax liability. Of course, they first say, oh, there's no way that's true. And wait a minute, and I can give a donation and my kid can also receive a scholarship from that same program. Yes, it all just sounds way too good to be true. So I think educating people is really important. And I don't know what Missouri has or what other states' tax credit scholarship programs look like, but here in Indiana, I mean, that's my job. I mean, my primary job is to get out into the schools. It starts, first of all, with educating the principals on what this program is and what it could do for their schools. Then, of course, talking with the pastors. Pastors have to support this, like most things in schools and churches. I mean, their buy-in really matters. But then having meetings with the school boards or church leadership, whoever sets the tuition has to understand all that as well. And then it expands from there, talking to actual congregations in between worship services or after worship services, and just educating them on really the impact that their program can have, and also what the benefit to them as the donor would be. And so really, it's all about education. It's about giving people touch points. It's just really keeping it in front of them. And again, it's tell people to start small. Make a $500 contribution, just see what happens. And one thing that we see pretty commonly is that people increase their donations from year to year because they see, oh wow, this really is a real program, and they see the benefit. So really, it's about education and really keeping things in front of people.
Yeah, great. The other thing I hear all the time, and I'm sure you probably hear it too, well, I don't want to participate in the program because it will entangle me with the State Department of Education. It will entangle me with government, and I don't want to do that.
Yeah. And it's interesting, of course, from a tax credit program, I mean, everybody likes to have a tax credit. So there isn't quite that, but some of the government entanglement, I think there is some validity for that in some cases, depending upon what the regulations are. Quite honestly, most of our schools here in Indiana were already state accredited, and we're already doing all the things the government was asking them to do, and so it really wasn't a big deal. similar schools, I mean, honestly, like our classical schools here in Indiana aren't apt to participate in the voucher program because they don't want any government oversight in that regard. And that's no judgment. I promise it's not. It's just a difference in philosophy. So you really got to look at each state and what those rules are. Some states don't really have any government oversight or extra strings attached, so to speak. But I think there is one thing that is pretty consistent, though. It's being accredited. We kind of had that conversation before. The states, in most cases, you have to be an accredited school by an approved third-party accrediting body like NLSA in order to participate in these programs.
Yeah, and we're very supportive of that. In fact, when we talk to states that are considering these programs, we encourage the one caveat that's out there is that they are accredited by a nationally recognized, state recognized accreditor like National Lutheran School Accreditation. And I think that's partly too of understanding your state's program, right? Because a lot of times voucher programs, it's your tax dollars, the government takes it, and then they are providing a voucher back to the family. And depending on what the state constitution says and how it's written, Will and I were talking a little bit about this with Ohio,
Right.
Wisconsin having a true voucher program. So it is the government giving you a voucher, which is much different than a tax credit program that's out there where I'm able to take that off of my tax liability. So the government doesn't have my money yet. And I think that's a big thing for us always to remember too. That's not the government's money. That's the government taxing us. So that's our money. And if it's a tax credit, the government doesn't have it. They're not giving it out in a voucher. Therefore, there's not the constitutional entanglements. Separation of church and state like there are with a true voucher program.
For sure. And that's probably why there are more tax credit scholarship programs in our country than voucher programs for that very point that you just made. And I think this is one thing too, as people sometimes challenge me about that separation of church and state and public schools versus private schools. And I always tell them, I am not anti-public schools. We need strong public schools in our country. Boy, do we need strong public schools in our country. So it doesn't have to be an either or type of a thing. Oh, if you're pro school choice, then you must hate, public schools. No, not at all. You can live in a both and world for sure. We need both to be. I mean, really, school choice is really about, choice and just allowing parents to make a choice of what the best educational environment would be for their particular kids. So that's really important. Again, I think that can kind of de-escalate some of the haters out there towards school choice as well.
Yeah, it's very much a positive message, not the negative side. And you're right. I hear that all the time that it's anti something or it's not. It's what it is. It's pro parents.
Right.
Pro ability to make your choice and decision on how to best educate your children. That comes in different ways.
But by the way, you touched on this earlier. I think that parent choice is probably the better term. I agree with that. Here in Indiana, our recent gubernatorial election, one candidate was very much in favor of expanding school choice. The other one was very much opposed to it. And the person who was opposed, she was saying it really, school choice. You're right. The schools get to choose which kids they want. That was kind of her angle.
Yeah.
It's like, it's really more about the parents than the schools. So you're right on track with that.
Yeah, it is interesting. And before we talked about, it will be interesting to see what's coming down the road nationally. President-elect Trump, who has talked about eliminating the Department of Education, which will mean some things, but also for the last several years in the House of Representatives, there has been a bill introduced called the Educational Choice for Children Act, ECCA. And with that, for the last year here, it actually got out of committee, which that has never happened before. And it got out of committee because it is a Republican-sponsored bill and backed there. And now with the new term coming up here, when we get into January, it will be filed once again in the House of Representatives. And the likelihood of it being passed is far greater now than it ever has been before. President-elect Trump is supportive of it. The Senate is supportive of it as well now, and it will come out of the House. This will be a tax credit program at the federal level. So what you're talking about before in terms of state tax credits, and again, for example, here in Missouri, or most scholars, I get to take off up to half of my state tax liability if I donate to the Most Scholars program. This would allow nationally for you to take off up to half of your federal liability tax credit. So that would be very substantial and would include those states that will never pass some type of program like that.
Yeah, we need to watch that carefully. And also, again, are there any strings attached? How will they manage it? How will they make sure that the credits are awarded and so forth? There's always the bureaucratic arm to these types of things, And so, I mean, I think it'd be great. What you just described would be fantastic. I know there's been some talk about this in years past as well, but tell you what, if the new administration can make all that happen, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, so it is definitely something to watch, and it will be interesting. Of course, we never know what kind of quote strings might be attached until after it's done, or how it will be monitored or distributed. All that's in the piece of legislation. So that's always a fun read. And then, of course, we have some other significant states. Texas bills have just been filed in Texas for the next session to start in January. And that does include such a program that other states have with tax credits and so on. So that is another one to watch. And then you did put up Ed Choice. If people want to find out more about what's going on per state, Ed Choice does a nice job, just edchoice.com too. And you can click on the state where you live, and it will describe what program or what are the possibilities of a program coming forth in that particular state. A great resource to have.
Yeah, just one more point here, I think, too. It's really important that our people are engaged in the process by talking with those local legislators. And I would venture to say that most people don't really know who their local representative or senator is. But we need to know those people, especially our principals and our school leaders, and we need to be talking about them and telling them, hey, we want these programs, we believe in these programs, the impact is huge. That's been a big part of Indiana's success, is just our legislators being talked to about these programs. And then we thank them, very intentionally thank them for all their work to keep these things strong. So that's just a little plug to get involved in the process by talking to your local legislators.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I'm glad you made that. I was just out in a state that has ESAs, and I was making that very point. Don't forget, once it's passed, sometimes we get complacent and we sit back and we say, oh, our work is done. Your work is not done. It's a constant part to say thank you to those legislatures. And obviously there's turnover too. A lot of our states have term limits now for the reps and the senators. So it's always good to be connected to them as parents, as administrators, and to constantly thank them for their work and their support of programs like tax credits or vouchers.
Right. It's interesting. We don't often think about the state or the government being one of our donors. But in some cases they're the school's biggest donor. And so stewarding the gift with a donor is really important. And so that's saying thank you, it's showing the impact, and it's getting to connect and know them. And so stewarding the gift is true also when it comes to the state, not just with your individual donors.
Yeah, and what a great time, right here with Thanksgiving next week. Great time to drop a line, a little postcard to your state legislator and say thank you for your support, and to encourage them to continue that support as well. So looks like we have no questions, Scott, other than all my questions that I just threw at you there. We really appreciate your time and your effort on this. We give great thanks to you. We talked several months ago. We're very excited by this presentation, and you delivered and then some. So great job. We truly appreciate it.
Well, happy to do it. It's good to be a part of this team. And, the future for our schools, I really think, is very bright. but we have to have that funding in place. It's just so critical right now, more than ever before. So thanks for doing these Finance Fridays. I think it's the impact is going to be real. So thank you so much.
Absolutely, yeah. Opportunity balance for our Lutheran schools, right? I mean, the time, such a time as this, and our schools are ready to go and are truly ministries of excellence. You talked about Perry Griezmann, and I know he used to say this, Dave Summermeyer as well. And I saw this attributed to a nun back in the 1960s, but the old saying, no margin, no mission. If we're not aware of financial stability and sustainability, we're not there to have a ministry of excellence that does go and make disciples. So this is what counts. Thanks so much. Blessings to you, and blessings to all of you out there serving in our Lutheran schools. May God continue to bless you and your work, and continue to bless our Lutheran schools as we spread the precious gospel.